I remember one of my mentors said to me, you don't take cases on to settle them, right? And I remember my response.
That's an interesting perspective.
I challenged him on that, and I said, okay, but what about family law?
Yeah.
Like, family law is the worst possible, like, I recognize that. I recognized that in law school. It was the worst possible area, this battle zone. I mean, you think about all the war analogies that we use when we're custody battle. It's a war. Those analogies are very violent language in family law. But I just accepted that, okay, system.
There's a student, right? So
the system doesn't work great. Everybody seems to be chirping about how the system isn't the greatest, but this is the best system that we have. So we keep beating our heads against that brick wall. And at some point, I recognize that if I keep doing it, I'll end up with brain damage. Fatal car accidents. I mean, I'm used to driving down to Windsor. I'm from Windsor.
You're born in Windsor?
Born in Windsor.
So Windsor is a border town of sorts.
It is.
It's a border. What does a border town even mean? Have you heard the term border?
Yeah.
I've heard of it. But what does it connotate, border town?
Well, on one side,
yeah,
you have, in fact, if you listen to the song Don't Stop Believing,
okay,
South Detroit would actually be Windsor.
Right.
Because there really is no South Detroit. It's Windsor. So you had the benefits because Detroit, at least growing up, was such a big city.
Right.
It was a growing city. I mean, I saw all my first concerts there, all the entertainment. But it was effectively, you had two different cultures. Also scared the crap out of me because the Detroit news was always about murder and killing. So as a child, when you reflect on trauma, I was always scared to watch the news because it was always the lead story was always something about.
So you were a child watching news? What child watching news? Come on, you weren't watching like cartoons and stuff like everybody.
I watched cartoons too. Scooby-Doo, though. I mean, tell me there isn't trauma in Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because like Windsor, Detroit, I've only passed through there. I've never stopped in Detroit. I'm only thinking about Detroit now because potentially I would have a family member going to school there or something, right? And there it is. It's been there all along. And if you want to catch a Leaf game, it's sometimes easier to catch a Leaf game. It's a good game to watch, at least for a while. It was, Ottawa, Toronto, or Detroit, Toronto. And when you go down to these places, you get all these fans kind of coming through, right? So, and well, that's where you were born.
Growing up, though, the natural rivalry in baseball's my sport.
Got it.
Detroit
Tigers.
Toronto.
Yeah.
Detroit, Toronto.
Yeah.
And then they went and realigned everything.
Yes.
And so now there still is that rivalry, but they don't play each other as much. So
it's not stadium too, Tigers.
Yeah. You know what, though? I miss the old ballpark.
Yeah.
I'm a traditionalist and a purist. That old hole of a ballpark where $4 got you in to the bleachers. And, as I got older, you bought a case of beer and sat in a parking lot across the street for an hour or two before the game to get ready. And then you were $4 in. And it was, the obstructive view seats. You don't see stadiums with those kinds of things anymore. The closeness to the field, you don't see that as much anymore.
So you grew up in Windsor.
In Windsor.
And you went to university in Windsor.
I went to university in Windsor. My mom actually was a nurse in Detroit at Henry Ford Hospital.
Okay.
And married a Detroit cop.
It's like an extension, these two cities.
Well, yeah, people will even go grocery shopping. Like, they'll live in Windsor and they'll go across
the cereals you can get in the United States as a child.
It's like just a bridge. You just go back and forth over the bridge.
Yeah, there's a bridge and a tunnel.
Yeah.
So you either took the bridge. I always liked taking the tunnel as a kid.
Okay.
But my mom, when she married the Detroit police officer, after my parents had separated, they separated when I was 6 and divorced. I was going weekends.
Oh, over to the States.
Okay.
Which probably fueled my trauma as a child because I was always afraid I would get murdered or abducted. Like those were the storylines.
But then I had the same feeling, and I grew up here in Flemington Park. So, I mean, it's the same feeling, but it is a worry when we're that age. And it must have been way more amplified for you because obviously you do know what it's like to live in a nice place like Windsor, and it's people leave their doors unlocked, I imagine, back then, and that kind of stuff will happen. And then you still know you're now moving into a different sort of an environment when you go into Detroit. I actually know somebody who went to Windsor to get her JD. It's called, I guess, JD.
Juris Doctorate.
Yeah,
The Juris Doctorate.
but she got a double one.
University of Windsor and University of Detroit Mercy.
And so she's got a JD to practice in Canada and in the U.S. So it's an advantage in that sense.
Yeah, I didn't follow that course.
Yeah.
I had no desire to practice in the States.
But, when you look at other border towns, say around even in Canada, you've got, say, Niagara Falls and Niagara Falls. That's not the same experience as Windsor, Detroit. Windsor, Detroit seem to be a lot more intimate, right?
It's more, like I find Niagara Falls is just more commercial, right?
Yeah, it's tourist. It doesn't have that feeling like,
Going from town.
when you could go down to the Windsor riverfront and your skyline was like what used to be called the Renaissance Center. I think it's now called the GM Center, but those towers, the circular tower being the centerpiece, you would be able to look over there and see that. I don't think you get that experience necessarily. Like, I travel into Buffalo a lot when I fly. I usually fly out of Buffalo now. And that experience, it's like this long road that then leads you to this bridge, and then you're in New York State. But it's not, there was an intimacy there. There was a connection that you felt being in Windsor, looking over at Detroit. Even when, and you'll often see that the skyline of Detroit, when they have a sporting event, for example, they'll have the skyline coming from Windsor. Or sometimes they reverse it and they'll show across the river the Windsor view of things, depending on, like hockey.
Yeah.
You might see if there's a Canadian element. If they're playing the Toronto Maple Leafs, they may show Canada as just across the border. There was that intimacy.
Yeah.
You went over there, you would go over there for dinner. You wouldn't necessarily, Niagara Falls, go over to the States for dinner. Although grocery shopping, I think people still do go over to the States for that. But yeah, it was that feeling like it was an extension of. And so that's my concept of what a border town is. But it's interesting to hear that.
Did you notice a lot of people from Detroit coming to Windsor?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was...
It's just one way, like, where people enjoyed from Windsor going to Detroit.
No, because we had cheaper beer.
Cheaper beer. And then when the casino...
Yeah.
When the casino came, you because Windsor was one of the first to get a casino. Now Detroit has 2 or 3. But at that point, remember, Windsor, it was groundbreaking that there would ever be a casino. Initially, I think it was run by the province. It's now, I think, privatized in Windsor. But I remember that. It was, and we had an initial casino, then we got a gambling boat from down south. So we had a river boat in Windsor for a while. What they did was they took over the Windsor Art Gallery, displaced the art gallery into the mall,
makes you more money this way,
and had this big space for the casino.
So you were there a while. You went to university there. You got your law degree there. Is that where you got your law degree?
I started in. I wanted to get out of Windsor. It was always my desire to get out of Windsor. I got my undergrad in psychology.
Okay.
4-year honors degree in psychology there. I wrote a thesis that ended up getting published.
Wow.
Yeah, probably indicative of the drugs I was using back then. It was kind of a psychotropic
Helps
trip.
the creative side, I am told.
But I do have a published paper in the British Journal of Clinical Psychology, which people often find interesting. I don't necessarily remember those times.
Right.
But then I wanted to get away. So I ended up going to Edmonton for law school. I went to the University of Alberta.
Okay.
My first year. And it was cold and lonely out there. Andrea, who's my wife, it'll be 25 years in May. We got engaged that very first year I was in law school when I came back for Christmas. And so I decided to move back. I moved back to Windsor.
She stayed in Windsor when you went there for school?
She stayed in Windsor when I went for school. And then when I came back to Windsor for my second year of university, she went to Mac to get her gerontology degree. And then ultimately we ended up back together. But she and I grew up across the street.
Okay.
We went to high school together. Yeah.
That's awesome. You know, a lot of times there's this idea that professional journeys are not personal journeys. You know, it's a professional journey, and let's just talk about the professional journey. Whereas now I think it's starting to become realized that the person and the professional are the same thing, the same person intertwined.
But I don't know I would have viewed it that way. It was a professional journey.
It was a professional journey. From when did you decide, hey, this is what I'm going to go?
Like grade 2.
Right. Okay. So you knew this.
Grade 2, I was always into, my interests were, as it turned out, what now is a genre of true crime. Right. My mom was always reading books like that. She was very much about the Kennedy assassination. And so I was always reading these books, and she had books about serial killers. Like, great. You wonder why I have trauma in childhood. I think I'm identifying.
Yeah, okay, right? There we go.
But we had
by the hour too.
I had an interest in it, and so what ended up developing from there was I also had this, what it turns out is a social justice kind of thing, a rightness. But as a kid, if you're able to talk well, if you're able to argue well, we often turn to those kids and say, you would make a good lawyer. So that sunk in. I didn't have my own self-identity. The concept of being a lawyer was it was a noble profession and you made a lot of money. So from grade 2 on, I wanted to be a lawyer. So my trajectory was always on that path. What's the easiest way for me to get to law school? Well, instead of following the sciences in undergrad, because I was very strong in math and science, I went into the social science. But in retrospect, the reason why I went into social science is because I love observing human behavior.
Sure.
So in retrospect,
when you're a lawyer to do that too, right?
Well, it does, but I don't think I recognized at that point in time that it was just the straightest path to get to law school. I can get the higher grades in social science to then get to law school. And then I went from there. It's now that I'm reflecting on things that I'm like, wow, the opportunity for me really was to learn about people.
So you always had that social aspect to yourself.
I did.
And when you started heading off to law school, what were your first impressions when you got there? Because now you're not studying social science anymore. You're not studying psychology. You're starting to study, tort and law and all these other things. How did that taste at first?
Well, I don't want to say it was an awful experience, but I think law school has it wrong. They identify these things as building rapport or getting to know, or even treating people as if they're human beings.
But when you first got there, I mean, let's imagine, right? You're just arriving into Edmonton. You're excited about your future, right? So everything that kind of comes your way, it's like, okay, so this is what it's about. So let's dive in. Or,
well, I mean, I think that initial, for me, it came crashing down kind of quickly because you realize how ultra competitive it is.
So you go to Edmonton and you notice the same, it's ultra competitive. Usually when we're in Toronto, we hear that about Toronto and Bay Street and versus other parts of Canada. But you're saying that you notice this. It's noticed that everywhere.
It's not just law school.
I suspect the culture of the university too.
Yeah, or the culture of a lot of curriculums.
Professional schools, period, have that. You're second guessing yourself. The concept of imposter syndrome. Do I really belong here?
Well, you had that going in.
I knew I belonged there. Well, maybe not going in. I think it's healthy to keep your ego in check as you go along in life. But certainly the experience that I went through, I don't deserve to be here. These people are alive. Just listening to people speak in the classroom, you would have people, I swear to God, that they would be going through the dictionary the night before to come up with the most complicated words that they can to explain a simple situation, which really, if you think about it, has become the nature of how law tends to be practiced. But it was intimidating. And when I was there, I have my moments where I'm like, should I continue this? Is this what I want? Then you start to recognize that, we had situations. I remember the constitutional question we were asked was, can Canada or can Quebec legally secede from Canada? Which was a topic at the time. Back, the referendum was just happening.
Right.
And I remember people, because back then you didn't have access to the cases through the internet. Yeah. The internet was still in its infancy at that point. Certainly as a research tool, people tearing articles out of books in the library so that nobody else could find it, so that they would have the nugget or the gem. I remember that happening in that exercise, and it was like, so it wasn't about lifting people up.
You had this thought in early days, somewhere in the middle. Help me kind of place it.
Well, I was only in Edmonton for 1 year.
For 1 year.
And so it's a fairly rapid track to come to those determinations.
What do you say it yourself at that point? Is it like you're already pot committed, you're invested, so you got to push through? Ignore. Or were there thoughts of like, hey, I already went and opened my big mouth that I'm going to go be a lawyer now, and there's this expectation on me? Was it something internally that drove you, or would you say there were also external factors that drove you to just keep moving forward?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above, right? I
don't think we reflect when we're that young. We don't really, we're just, I know for myself, we just kind of go through the motion.
But if you look back on it now, there was something, right? Because sometimes it happens. I remember it happening as well. Everyone recalls going, oh, hold on a second. Was it myself telling myself this, or was it something I had kind of set myself up for? I'm going to go be this. Now I got to deliver. I got to finish. And sometimes in some cases, it's family saying like, we're paying for this, or their pressure is like, you're going to turn out to be this. So, it could be sometimes more one than the other, but I'm just curious what it was for you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think on reflection, it was more me. The family came in not because I was the first to go to university in my family. So there was no external pressure. I think my parents were proud of the fact that I had achieved to that level, but to walk away from that, you're still worried about the disappointment that they might feel. Well, wait a second.
Sure.
This is something that you've been talking about, Dave, for your whole life, and not seeing it through. So that part of it, for sure. But it wasn't an applied pressure from them. It was more the pressure from within that you got to stay this course. You've invested this much in it, because I didn't have, I paid for my own schooling. By that point, my parents had exhausted everything that they had saved for, because we didn't have RESPs back then. Sure. So I think my parents had enough saved for me to get through university for about 2 years. And then I was on the OSAP track after that.
So you first start noticing that these things start standing out to you. You talk about people ripping pages out. Isn't there a term in law called disclosure that tells you that? Anyway, that's something else altogether. But the point is that you notice this behavior. What I'm curious to know is that, when you're studying this, and this is something that I wonder about now. I went the business route. I went through business, and then it was going to be business into law, maybe, right? But I don't ever remember there being many courses, or maybe I didn't just take them. Maybe they were electives, but it, to do with, ethics and etiquette, and in terms of how to deal with your peers and so on. I remember the competition. But I remember there being a lot of talk, other than maybe a course on ethics that you have to take because of it's a requirement. Yeah, but you read through it, there hadn't really been a discussion on, look guys, this actually applies to us right now, and here's how, right? It was more like, it's a textbook, read it, finish the assignments, do the test, exam, and one
Well,
more done. Check that off the list.
Law school taught me how to take a case to the Supreme Court of Canada and how to argue the law and how to piece everything together. Well, statistically speaking, very few cases ever make it that far. Those skills that you speak of, I call necessary skills, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but they're viewed as soft skills.
Soft skills, right?
Right. When I speak about reform and change and how we, as a culture, as the legal culture needs to view things, we're dealing with, even if you're dealing with corporations, you're dealing with human beings, and the systems that we've created around us. I'll only speak about law because that's my area of expertise, but I suspect that if we looked into other areas, having read Dr. Mate's work, the reality is it's a dehumanizing process.
So that's what we can say about the system that's out there. But in our own personal journey, do we realize, I guess is one of the things I'm wondering about now, is you're progressing in your professional life. As you're progressing as a professional, we're at this time, late teens, early 20s, right? Mm-hmm. And we're looking to the future. We're going to be something. Yeah. And we talked about kind of the bias we had going in. This is a noble profession, and it's going to make money. So there's a high level of motivation to gain this status. So on your way in, you don't say to yourself, "I'm becoming less human." You don't say that to yourself.
No, you show yourself.
How do you just keep going? So
You do, but I questioned myself along the way. I mean, I remember my third year of law school. I took a course in clinical advocacy. It was supposed to go hand in hand with working in the law clinic. I didn't do that part of it, but I took the clinical advocacy course. And what I presented on at the time was kind of a precursor to what's now known as collaborative law. I talked about holistic practitioners within law.
So what clinical advocacy would that be like if there is an extenuating circumstance for someone, like if they had an addiction issue or
no.
health, or like, that's what I think of when I think
in your lens, clinical advocacy within law school was there was a clinic, a legal clinic that was providing, students were running it, providing advice and their expertise for people navigating on certain issues. We had to do a major project, and so I talked about holistic, which is where I brought in the concept of having, social workers, psychologists, financial people, different people with different expertise, so that I can stick to, I can stay in my lane. Law is what I know. But you have to be able to build those. So it was always there.
Questioning certain things along the way.
Absolutely.
You come out, you get your law degree. It's a big milestone. Mm-hmm. It's a big moment in life. At that point in time, you now know that your next step is you're going to go join, I guess, is it a law firm, or did you go work in government? What did you decide to pursue next? Yeah.
Well, and I think at that point I was looking for the experience, being exposed to different areas. So the full service experience. Now, what I didn't do at that point was I had no desire of going to Toronto. Majority of the articling jobs are in Toronto. Mm-hmm. I eschewed that so that I could focus on, I wanted a community that wasn't Windsor. I wasn't looking to stay in Windsor, but comparable size. I actually focused on London. I had a few interviews there, nothing panned out. Had a couple of interviews in Hamilton. And if real,
what kind of law were you looking into, like for the
I wanted the breadth of the experience.
Just like a multidisciplinary.
Yeah, at that point, what you wanted to get into a firm that practiced everything.
Okay.
So you wanted a firm as opposed to a sole practitioner. So you wanted exposure to the civil law, to family law.
Did you do articling? You had to do articling, obviously. And where did you article, and what kind of firm?
Well, what ended up happening was I got no jobs. I came back to law school in September of, I guess it would have been 1996. So 96, 97 was my last year. And how people look down on you if you didn't already have an articling job. I remember one conversation and I was standing with a group of people, and I wasn't particularly fond of this person, but I remember them saying it was really important because it was status. Professional schools tend to be that way. Law school was definitely like that. Turning to me and saying, "So where are you working for articling?" I said, "I don't have a job yet." And he literally looked me in the eye. Then he turned away from me physically and didn't communicate with me again. Now, do I think that was intentional? No. But it's what we were taught, that high level competition. What ended up happening was,
in that moment when that happens,
yes.
Okay, so what goes on then in your mind at that moment going, I gotta go get a job no matter what, or
no,
I'm fine?
No.
What do you say to yourself at that point?
It was more like, who do you think?
You saw it as a reflection of him, not you.
Yeah, this is what we're building up to be.
So you never thought yourself lesser because some guy did that?
I'm sure I did. Because that's true. I share
right? That's the pressure.
Yeah.
That, you don't belong, you're not good enough, if this, if that. Versus you might have just said like...
But I also knew that, I had given up applying to an area where, maybe 60, 70% of the jobs were situated. I had to carry that too. I had to take ownership of that myself. But yeah, it was definitely, and I never talked to that person again. That person probably doesn't even realize that in that moment they did that, because
but you didn't intend. Did you say to yourself at that point, no, I'm okay because, here's what gives me my worth?
I didn't think I was ever going to get a job. It's like when you break up with your first partner, you never think you're going to find somebody else again. I was, crestfallen is probably the word that I felt at that point, but you persevere. And what ended up happening was I found a job in Waterloo. Kitchener-Waterloo was not even on my radar. And things happen for a reason. I do believe that. And so I ended up there, and it's been the most incredible community to not only grow my professional roots, meet some incredible people along the way, but also to raise a family. We were fortunate in that when we moved to Waterloo Region, it hadn't grown. Blackberry was in its very nascent stage.
Right, Blackberry was, I forgot about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I read something about Blackberry this morning, but it was, it was growing. It hadn't yet become the Northern Tech Center that it's seen as now. So to be there through that evolution of that community, like an old German farming community, was pretty cool. When I'm just thinking about it right now. I hadn't necessarily thought about that.
What landed you in Waterloo then?
I got an articling job at a fantastic firm to this day.
Was it like a full service firm?
Full service firm.
Okay.
Full service firm. And at the time, one of my mentors, so the principal was a younger lawyer. He's a few years older than me. He and I still keep in touch. He's very involved in collaborative law. And in fact, he and I and another individual were the co-chairs before I had stepped away from law at the end of 2019.
So that's a great place to get started. Get some great mentoring.
Well, the one mentor ended up becoming a judge, and he had back then, they didn't, so federal prosecutions of different things were privately outsourced. So he was a federal prosecutor doing some high-level drug cases, and I was reading through wiretaps. I remember it was just an incredible experience, and just such diverse personalities to be able to walk away from. So I treasure that experience. The only thing that I somewhat regret is that they didn't, at the time, because of their space and their situation, they weren't able to keep me on, because it was an incredible group of individuals.
So that you're off to a great start, because being around those kind of people in this law, it's in this sort of profession, it's that's not often the first stories we hear about articling, and when you hear about going out there and working, I don't know how many hours a week are you supposed to work if you're supposed to be a self-respecting lawyer. What is it? What's the number?
Well, and I probably told myself that, like I was working more than I should, not because they asked me to, but yeah, I mean, I was putting in 60, 70 hours a week, probably not in articling, but once I started on my own, weekends there was no such thing as weekends. You fit in things when you could fit them in.
And where did you learn that? Like, how did it come upon you that?
That's a good question.
That work culture.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's a good question. It's almost like there's a lot that we take away from our professional schools that seems to be inherent. It becomes the norm. I can't say that anybody ever said to me, other than I need you to finish this task, that the expectation is that you work 70 hours to do it, but we think that we need to. We think that that's just what we do. Those are the things that I started to question over time. Hey,
isn't that interesting? So we question it, but we keep going.
But I didn't question it then.
Oh, so
I started questioning it until later on. Like,
okay.
What the hell am I doing here?
What made you notice it, though, that when you did bring awareness to it?
What made me notice it? I think I had to look within myself and notice how much I had given up.
You noticed that you'd start giving up.
Well,
what did you know?
Especially kids. Once you start having kids, and it's like, wait, I can't be there for, and I was trying to balance it all.
Yeah.
Sure.
Thankfully, Andrea was staying at home. And what I've come to realize over time is that she was shoring up the shortfalls that were in the home so that I could continue to pursue it. And she didn't want to be the one to pull me back down. But I mean, she's talked to me about it again in retrospect, but it was just, this is what you do. You have to work hard. The work ethic probably came from my dad.
It's a good thing to have a strong work ethic.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But work ethic balanced with sacrifice and taking a deeper look at it.
And sometimes there's a difference between, I don't know, I'm just thinking about my life or different awareness of different people's lives that I've worked with is sometimes you need to do that 60-hour work week just to push through to get started or to get the momentum in your career going, right? You build that kind of momentum. But once we have our bearings, if you will, or our footing, we don't pay attention that we have the momentum that we were seeking to get off the ground, and we don't have to keep going like that. But we'd never stop to think about it. And you just have this kind of like circular wheel that just keeps going. And
the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
I call it always at startup, because when we're done with startup, we're starting now. When we've finished with one level, when we've mastered it, someone else comes along where there's this feeling, the way you just described it, someone looks at you and then turns the other way because you don't have this yet, So now you're in that next group of people. So you're starting up there. And then when you get done to the top, now you're starting up somewhere else. So you're always in startup. It never really settles. And I find in the pursuit of greatness or whatever.
And it feels like you're catching up too, right? The startup is catch up because somebody always knows more than I do. And this, I think, again, where does this come from? I mean, these are just natural things that we're picking up that are...
It's called capitalism, baby.
Yeah, it is.
Go get as much as you can.
It is.
And it's yours for the taking.
It is.
But there's also something to do with, realizing that, look, we've got a lot of potential, right? We've got a lot of capability. Look at all the good that you could be doing. These are all the things that drive us too, right? You're effective. You're making money. You're providing for Andrea and the kids, right? You're doing something good. And you're leading a more comfortable life. You're starting to plan about their future and all the things that they could have that you might not have had, right? You're thinking about all those things, and those become your motivators to just keep trucking.
But stopping along the way and recognizing, okay, in the pursuit of this.
So what did you sacrifice?
What did we sacrifice? is extremely important. And fortunately, I make it sound worse than it was. I was there for ball games. I was able to coach. It just meant that I was finding other time.
Sleep as much that night or
other time. Well, I mean, whenever I was in trial, I mean, I call myself a recovering litigator. When I was litigating, I mean, I was pretty fierce at how I conducted a trial. And I remember I would sleep in a separate part of the house. In our first house, we had basement, seriously, with a futon. And I would sleep because I had all my papers spread around, and I would wake up because I thought of a line of cross-examination. It would come to me in my sleep, and I'd write it out. And then some days I'd look at it and I'm like, that was pretty common.
I love hearing this because like no one talks about this. I would have, used to get these, I don't know if you can do it anymore, the Toronto Star, I just get a couple of these spools, and I would put this spool of paper and I create a chronological timeline. And I would have the timeline of the case and then all my evidence, because you can't flag your evidence on, I have to like know exactly where everything is. So I have a stack like this, and I just memorize the timeline, and I would literally sleep with my notes around me. I'd wake up. I would be like, okay, if they come at me.
And if I get asked this is what I'm going to
Yeah, you wake up. You're like, oh, what if they come at me this way? How am I going to handle that?
Can you imagine being a witness? Like, I couldn't imagine being a witness in a trial if I was cross-examined. My impetus, my reason for being when I was cross-examining somebody was to break them.
Yes.
Right? I would incessantly go at it. And if I realized that I couldn't gain traction, which wasn't very often, there was always something I could pick at.
Yeah.
In family law, they're replete with affidavits all over the place. If you have 10 or 12, 20 affidavits in a particular action, I guarantee you that there's an inconsistency somewhere. I knew your stuff better than you did. When you got up there, you were in my sights. That's what litigation was about.
It is so, you live in it. You live in trial. You're physically.
So where did a guy like who comes through your path, all of a sudden, I'm not getting it. You're this guy who has an issue with how people are ripping papers out of. I'm going to remember that for a while. And then you decide you enjoy litigating, and so you're going to go after it. You had choices. You could have gone anywhere else. You chose litigating, right?
Your choices were
and
limited.
It's not a bad thing to be either. Like, it's needed, right? So
your choices were limited. I mean, I remember one of my mentors said to me, "You don't take cases on to settle them." Right. And I remember my response. I challenged him on that. And I said, okay, but what about family law?
Yeah.
Like, family law is the worst possible. Like, I recognize that. I recognized that in law school. It was the worst possible area, this battle zone. I mean, you think about all the war analogies that we use when we're custody battle. It's a war. Those analogies are very violent language in family law. But I just accepted that, okay, system
there's a student, right? So
system doesn't work great. Everybody seems to be chirping about how the system isn't the greatest, but this is the best system that we have. So we keep beating our heads against that brick wall. And at some point, I recognize that if I keep doing it, I'll end up with brain damage. So I took myself.
Kool-Aid.
Well, I drank the Kool-Aid initially, but then I pulled myself out completely. Once I made that decision in 2016, and I made that decision because of the things that I was encountering.
Did you become specialized in family law then and practice primarily within that, or did you litigate across the board then?
No, I was family law. So when my first job was with a criminal lawyer, there was a lot of intersection between criminal law and family law. So I would deal with the family law cases. I did a lot of child protection work. I actually had a contract at one point with the Children's Aid Society. But when it came to this, so you asked me, back to your question, how does my mindset then take me in that direction?
Yeah.
It's suspending the disbelief. It's a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? This is what I'm expected to do. It may not fit in with what my values are, but this is the way that it's done. and I would gear myself up for these cross-examinations.
Yeah, it's a pretty, I imagine there's a high to it, right? When you're
sure.
And
when it's over.
It's a bit, because again, that system is predicated on winning.
Adversarialness.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it's winning. It's dehumanizing right from the start. We refer to people not as people, but as applicants and respondents and clients. All of the language.
You yourself said, just earlier on, you were saying, hey, if something is like, I had you in my sights.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, it's either you do that or you're not a lawyer or you're not doing your job. And what I'm curious to see is that, and I notice this consistently in every time, every part of your journey or your story, is that it didn't sit right with you. Mm-mm. But something told you that you have to keep going. Maybe because you're an honorable person, actually, that you feel like you have to keep going, doing something that you feel is dishonorable. But because you're honorable, because, hey, listen, I've signed up to be this is my job, I got to do it. So it's interesting how just the honor in you, but when you takes you forward in what you might consider to be a path that is dehumanized.
What pulls you out of it, though, is
I'm trying to understand what pulled you into it first.
You're so busy. The cognitive dissonance, I feel you just kind of like loop in it for a long time. It's like you are so...
realize it's happening.
You do.
Because that's 10 years you just talked about going by.
Your archetype of what a lawyer is that. It's growing up, F. Lee Bailey, right? And even when I was in law school, the O.J. Simpson trial was going on. Yeah. And that was the zealous advocacy. Yeah. Leave no stone unturned. This is what if the system works, then it will be able to sort out the truth from the lie, but you have a role to play in that, and that's to zealously advocate for your client.
Were there other things that kind of reinforced it for you? For example, I'm going to go back to that scenario where there's a guy looking at you saying heavy article somewhere. Was there now a similar sort of guy saying, hey, so what are you working on? And now you did have an answer for them, and instead of looking away, they kept looking at you saying, okay, now you're part of this. Was there some reinforcement to the whole thing? Do you know what I'm saying?
The reinforcement was getting favorable judgments, mm-hmm. right? And cost awards, right? I mean, I was once asked, what was your greatest day in court? And this is, I was asked this when I was being trained as a mediator. What was your greatest day in court? And I remember thinking about that, and it came to me pretty quickly. It was a case where a parent had absconded with a child a week before the other parent's visits were to become overnight. I effectively advocated to get that child placed with the parent who had never had an overnight with the child since the child was very young. So the best day was getting that judgment. 36 pages of brilliance where I had done my job. This was the pat on the back, the external validation that I was getting from the court, along with a massive costs award. And then recognizing that, and I forget whether it was 6 months or a year later, that parent came back to me because they now don't have any effective communication skills. You've taken that away. When I cross-examine you, you don't hold it against me. You hold it against the other person. And in fact, that other parent had called me at one point to say, well, now that you're not representing this person, can you represent me? Right? So they don't see me as the enemy after the fact. And then I found out that I think it was 7 years later, the child committed suicide. We don't do longitudinal studies of the impact of what we do.
Yeah.
And we need to. We need to start bearing witness to what the effects of this, in my view, terribly broken system are. Mm-hmm. Right?
The pay was good and there was no...
Oh, and I can
the consequences were not, Yeah,
like when I was like in child or school social work, so 30 to 40% any given year, my kids were actively suicidal of my clinical caseload. And I started just looking at the backgrounds of them. And I remember one year, 50% of my kids, there was only like 6, but 3 of the 6 was they had Section 112 assessments earlier in their youth. So like they were 6, 7 years old, and I had them as teenagers now. And so as a person that did those assessments and then just to see similar children, we don't follow enough. And the damage that we do as participants in the system is sometimes overwhelming. And so I think the longer you're in it, I remember you mentioned 2016, like you had a moment in 2016.
That's when I found out this kid.
So that's the thing, is that we have these moments where we're like, oh shit, we thought we were helping. And what we're doing is being weaponized, not for the nurturing or the helping of kids. Because I know that's been hard for me to struggle and chew with. So like, what was 2016? You found out this child died by suicide, and then take us through that.
Yeah, well, so the flip side, my best day in court was, and I've spoken about this, I hold up the decision.
It's the same case.
It's the same case. And the worst day as a lawyer was this kid's life being reduced to 2 paragraphs.
Yeah.
And that was her obituary. Right? And the first time I told the story was actually the first time I introduced myself as, hi, I'm Dave. I'm a recovering litigator. And you heard some chuckles in the crowd. And then because I was presenting, the person who had asked me the question, her name is Jennifer Souser. Jennifer had asked me, what was your best day as a lawyer? And that's what caused me to, okay, so what was my best day? What was my worst day? And it was the same case. And when I held up that obituary, you heard people gasping.
Yeah.
Right. What did you say to Andrea that day?
I don't know that I said anything to her.
This is something you just kept to yourself. And
yeah, I mean, this is what I was expected to be, and I was successful at it. But it takes me a little while to process things too. So I don't know that I necessarily saw the impact that it had on me at that point. But, what I started to do was to extricate myself from those. I did, coincidentally, I kept my contract with the Office of the Children's Lawyer because my approach
changes. Yeah.
Well, and I think my approach always had been, how can I help this family gain peace by using the wisdom that this young person is sharing with me and entrusting me with? How can I use that? So my OCL cases very rarely went to trial because I was able to approach it from a different way. I didn't have to be, although I was an advocate for the child and a lawyer in every sense of the word, representing their interests and what they're telling me, I could still find a way to utilize that to have people take a step back from the vitriol and the acrimony that the system tends to inflame and come to a resolution.
Well, what that tells me is that if the system enables you to do it that way, then it's a matter of choice then.
Well, it's always a matter of choice.
There you go.
No, but so are you asking me, is it a matter of choice for me or is it a matter of choice for...
If you could go from one day being, about the win and people in your sights, in the same system where the next day you could go to trying to make sure everybody comes out the way you just described it, the system hasn't changed. You just chose to do it differently.
That's right.
There you go.
That's right.
So that tells me it's not a systematic thing then. It's a personal choice.
Well, it's a personal choice, but yet I see so many people, and I struggled. So before 2016, I struggled playing both sides.
Right.
Maybe it's a culture within the system.
Well, I think it is. I think it is. And I think sometimes you're left to feel inferior if you're not that advocate that, and some of the things I see, and this is where I enjoy my role actually more as a mediator.
Right.
Because I can sit back. Not too long ago, I was brought in to help with a facilitated settlement meeting where things had become so polarized and entrenched over the course of years. And I was brought in the course of a day, was able to help these people, at least for the moment. I don't think that there was anything magical, get unstuck to see that there was a bigger picture and come to a resolution on the eve of trial, as that fresh perspective coming in. Because the more that we immerse ourselves into something, I mean, you can hear the passion in my voice when I talk about things. I'm immersed in this. So sometimes I need that outside person to be able to say to me, you know what, Dave, have you thought about this? Or tell me more about that. Teasing out those curious questions to get me thinking outside of my own head, to be able to look at things maybe a different way, right? You know, I don't, my career as a lawyer has left a lot of wounds and a lot of scars, you know, but you're right. I made a choice and I've decided. That said, I still find that there's that wanting to pull back in, because this is what the archetype of a lawyer is. You're not a lawyer if you do it that way. So that's when you have to find your own tribe and the people. It's a cultural piece too. So that's what when you said that, Trina, it resonated with me.
Yeah, because I mean, it's still the same legal system at the end of the day. It's still using the same knowledge that you have. And look at you, you're doing it differently. And that's why I asked about the reinforcements as well, because that's how culture works. There's reinforcement at some point. There's a reward. Did you find that now, and what I'm hearing you talk about really is that you started placing different values on what reward meant. Earlier on,
you have to do that intrinsically,
but you did it.
I did, but the system still values winning, and the system,
and there's judgment and competition. Within the system as well, right?
So that's what I'm wondering about. So you went from, and this is the hard part for a lot of people to do, I find, right? Is that and I don't think it's exclusive to law. I think it's out there in a lot of different places. But when we look at it, there is a lot of emphasis put on the win. There is a lot of emphasis put on the monetary rewards and things. It happens in business all the time. But where did you start going from saying, hey, I will make less, you had to know this, I'm going to make less money doing it this way. I'm not going to get the kudos for the win, right? Those external reinforcements are not going to be there anymore. Right?
But from a business standpoint,
it was half of what you said at the beginning when you said you were pursuing law.
Right? But you can still, from a business standpoint, still make money doing it that way. You're holding true to your values.
Yeah.
There's a huge shift that still needs to happen. We hear a lot being discussed, particularly within family law, the advent of social media. I can tell you that most of those people that I've come across don't walk the talk, but I do, and I'm going to continue to. I'm going to continue doing it this way. If people, I don't see my role as trying to get people to follow me. The reality is, if what I'm doing well, and I'm staying true to myself, which is important to me, and is effective, people will naturally follow.
I think that's the key right there, is that the reward is being true to yourself. And you know, you value that now, being true to yourself. It seems to me that, you know, what your journey that you've gone through is probably very similar to what a lot of people go through right from when they start out in law school, and they see certain behavior, right, which they're like, wait, this doesn't look like how it ought to be. Ripping pages out of a book.
You shouldn't be tearing pages,
right? I mean,
out of a journal.
And we are the people who are supporting the legal system here. We're right. So if you notice that, and you kept noticing it, you couldn't have been the only one who noticed it, right? So as people notice this going on, at some point in time, they bury that, they stop listening to that voice, and you just kept listening to this voice inside your head, but you, at some point in time, said, maybe you talk about 2016 being a tipping point, and you didn't even realize it, maybe even when it happened at that moment. You got the news, it kind of didn't sit well with you that day, but then you just kept on going. But when you look back, it's like the accumulation of all of these tipping points that finally got you to see it, and you just said to yourself one day, you know what, this is how I'm going to do it. Now, on that day when you decided, I mean, you might not be able to pinpoint the day, there had to have been a thought going, there's going to be consequences for this.
Well, I think the immediate thought is back to what you had just said. Am I going to be able to sustain myself doing this? What storm will I have to weather to stay true to myself? I mean, fortunately, at that point, I was quite immersed in collaborative law, and I was in the midst of taking my mediation courses. So I was on that path. But yeah, you absolutely, am I going to be able to feed myself and my family? So those are the things that you start to worry about. But again, I was able to do that having practiced for 17 years. I started practicing in 1999.
You knew you were going to be fine.
Yeah, I had, the inertia was in my favor. Now, stepping away from practicing law in 2019 and just pulling the cord completely.
So did you reevaluate your values to pull that
burn
cord?
out.
Okay, there. Yeah. So what did that look like?
How does that? Yeah. When do you know you're burning up?
I don't. Again, the burnout is not a single event; it's a process.
Yeah, sure.
And I think for about a year prior to, I was open to opportunities, and the opportunities that I was looking at weren't in law at all. And where I ended up going, you want to talk about a complete change of course. Here's a person who since grade 2 has wanted to go to law school, to become a lawyer, to become that noble professional, to make a lot of money. In my litigation stage, wanted to, really effectively destroy the other person on there and win my cases, to saying, you know what, I've kind of had it. This system is so resistant to change, and I feel like I'm kind of on my own. And I wasn't completely on my own. There were a few people that believed the way that, but not enough in my view. So I applied for this job with a charity, and a charity that helped children who were going through their own trauma because they had witnessed or been victims of violence and abuse, or had witnessed a crime and were going to have to testify. And I went there, fish out of water. I had never done anything like that because I had been in law my whole life.
That makes sense. You're trying to keep that balance to.
I think there was
yourself.
A value to it
Yeah.
that caused me to gravitate towards this charity in particular. Yeah.
Is that when you started experiencing the burnout? Is that because it was just too much on your plate? So when you said burnout, would it?
Yeah, I mean, in any given year, I had, and Trina, with having the office of the children's lawyer, you have, as a lawyer, you have files that are active, then you have files that are dormant, but they're going to come back. So, I mean, at any given time, I had 50 to 100 cases going on because I was also assisting families going through the transition of separation and divorce, trying to do that in a culture that values winning. I see it in collaborative all the time. People talk about collaboration, and it's not that. It's still about winning. I see the mentality that a lot of these lawyers hold, where they can't, they can't consider that there may be other perspectives. They say, just because you say you're collaborative, and I was actually speaking about this before I stepped away from law, let's really evaluate what collaboration means. It means valuing everybody's role and everybody's perspective at the table, and then figuring out a way to move forward. Law does not lend itself to collaboration or to perspective.
Yeah.
So
you had 50 to 100 cases going. You're on fire. That's a.
Yeah. Oh, I was at the top, right? I
don't know what a lot is or what's an achievement.
I mean, in terms of my, I wasn't suffering financially. Was I the highest paid lawyer? No. But my impetus was to help people going through this and really help kids. The perspective that I gained as a children's lawyer was that, you know what, there are these individuals, these human beings, aside from the parents, that really require us to listen to them and to wrap around them. But what happened was I stepped away. I was getting all kinds of collaborative files. I wasn't, I had it. I wanted, so what do? I pull the plug, send all of the clients that I had at that point out to lawyers that I respected. I didn't sell my practice. I didn't try and make money from it. Although perhaps I could have. That wasn't what my goal was, and I stepped away. But the burnout didn't go away, right? The burnout stayed. And so I lasted at the charity for about 1.5 years, recognized that the burnout was still there. My mom had passed away early on in COVID. My grandmother was one of the first cases in Windsor of COVID, went in with a pretty sharp mind and came out, and she hasn't been the same.
Describe though, when you said the burnout.
Yeah, what is
describe that. What does that feel like to a seasoned lawyer? How do you know you're burning out?
You just don't want to do it anymore. I can,
lost the motivation.
I could picture myself. Yeah, I don't know that the motivation loss was there. I mean, I still effectively assisted people. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I just saw myself, when you can see yourself pulling up stakes and doing something that's so completely different from what you've ever done, because even though the charity aligned with how I had done things, my role within the charity was as the executive director. That's something that I've never done. I was a sole practitioner. Now I go to managing 15, 16 people within this organization. And then you throw COVID on top of that, where charities at that point didn't know whether there was going to be another check coming and what was going to happen. The donors decreased because there was a blip with their investments, all kinds of things. But I just recognized I had never given myself, and throughout my career, I didn't recharge. So what did it look like? I was exhausted mentally, physically. I just didn't really have an interest in doing anything that had a purpose. You know what I did the first month after I left the charity? I had purchased a house down in Windsor because for those who have kids in university, residence is outrageous.
Yes.
So I bought a house in Windsor.
Yeah.
And so there was
actually cheaper.
it was cheaper.
Yeah.
Because I could, there are other tenants in the house. And I went down to Windsor and with my dad and spent a month painting and just doing.
So you just took time out.
Just took time out and just things that didn't require me to think beyond, okay, so what color palette do I want to put together? What do we want to do with this?
Getting back to basics again.
Getting back to basics.
Yeah.
And then I took the next 8 months and I didn't work at all. And then
Isn't that so amazing when you've had this lifestyle
The
of
sabbatical?
just go, and then you have that.
when you finally let it sink
Yes.
in. Yes.
And so when you were doing this, I mean, this is why they actually talk about taking sabbaticals like this, not just a vacation for 2 weeks. And it's exactly what the path that you follow. I mean, it's so consistent. There is there's this ambition, there's going out, there's winning, there's saying this is not enough. Then there's, I don't want to do this anymore. It's very, very consistent with the stories you hear.
Yeah.
And then there is the break, and then there is the epiphany, right? And in that break, you're reflecting on all the years of all the cases and all those moments, and now you're starting to see the pattern in yourself, because you're stepping outside of yourself now, right? What did you see then?
Well, I mean, it was a bumpy road.
It's probably pretty uncomfortable. I know for me, it was really uncomfortable at first.
Andrea, it was, I'm sure there are days where she'd tell you it was a roller coaster with me, not knowing my affect or mood on a particular day. And she became very adept, because even when I was practicing, you didn't know how the day went. So when I would come in, those that love us become very adept at picking up on where we are. And so she had done that. And even to step away, like I left home for a month to go down to Windsor, and that was emotional for her and for I and for the kids. Of course, yeah. Because you're
gone.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, I think you question, is there something that you're not getting here? But it wasn't that at all. It was just being able to get outside my own head. So it was a roller coaster. I think around September. So I was down in Windsor, came back home.
How many months was that then?
So about 6 months,
Okay.
4 or 5, 6 months. In September, I started feeling the itch again, but it was different this time. It was, for me, this leg of my career, I hope to make money, but that's not I want its impact. As I take this journey going forward, it's about impact. It's about, you know, whether you want to call it something cliche like legacy, it's what impact am I going to have? How am I going to make things better? You know, I see myself in legal reform. And legal reform to me is, let's hold the mirror up to
Look at
the
ourselves.
system and the profession. Say, do you like what you see? It doesn't have to be me saying this is my, because that's it. What I'm sharing is my experience. It's not everybody's experience.
You know, in a time right now when there's a lot of talk about mental health and mental wellness, was it you who were saying to me what lawyers, the legal industry and what lawyers are going through in terms of their mental health and the challenges that they're facing? Was it? I think it's you.
Yeah, they're the number one in profession for suicidality at this point. So
and it wasn't always that way.
no,
Right? Lawyers weren't even in the top 5, I don't think.
No, and I've seen it. I've seen it just in my relationships with a lot of lawyers and beautiful. And this is the thing, like really beautiful people. A lot of people are helping, and we're seeing this disconnect, but not everyone's necessarily understanding. And I think really what it comes down to is, you know, most people that I have worked with that are lawyers are truly helpful people. They went into law to be helpers of people and a pursuit of justice. And then they get into the mix of it, and that was their values and their authenticity. And then that part of them is a little bit suppressed, the humanity of it suppressed. So it becomes this cycle of like not living authentically within our profession, because we have to be ourselves, whether we're at home or in our profession. We have to be.
And you were saying it earlier.
Compartmentalized.
You were saying it earlier as well. How, I forget the term that you used, but you said something to the effect of like you're championed if you're.
Yeah, there's a social currency.
Social currency you talked about.
Yeah, there's a social currency.
Amongst
just amongst any professions, you see that I've experienced this in child welfare, I experienced this in law. Well, child welfare and law really intersect a lot. You're in law effectively. But yeah, like if you work excessively and you're not taking vacations and you're available 24/7 and you're not working the weekends, there's this social currency or kind of like a martyring of I'm always available. I'm working the hardest. And I know when I started to create boundaries and I wasn't available at 6 o'clock in the morning for phone calls or at 8 o'clock at night or on a Saturday, then it's like, oh, must be nice to take all this time off. Yep. I'm like, are you kidding? I still worked a 12-hour day.
You know what?
Well, it just goes back to that. I'm just picturing this image of a guy looking the other way from you, right?
Yeah.
Like, you are not good enough,
Yeah.
right? I'm not even going to acknowledge your existence,
Yeah.
right? And it's present. Obviously, it's present. So what do you say?
Well, I mean, it stuck with me. I still tell the story, so it had an impact on me.
And it was a motivator doing it to you. It could be a family member that does it to you.
Yeah.
In some cases, right? So it happens. It's a real thing, and that's what I mean by these reinforcements, right? Mm-hmm. But then here's you, and that's why I'm loving this conversation that we're having with you, because you've gone through all of it, and before, you didn't finish like that. You said, here, like, this is probably the most exciting chapter you're about to write. And I love about where we are with you, David, because you know, somebody like you, typically we would talk to like 5 or 10 years from now, when you've been through the full, you know, iteration. But here you are, you're not waiting. You're not waiting till the end of, like, you know, like, you don't retire this way. This is not how you go out. You make a change right in the middle. This is like prime time for, I would say, us. Like, this is prime time. You've got all this experience right behind you.
Yep.
We talked the other day, and he was like, you won't have a problem getting clients if you wanted clients.
That's right.
It's not hard for you. This is when you cash in on exponential returns for all of the investments you've made up until this time. And you're passing on it. And you're passing on it to do something which right now you're not even sure about, actually, isn't it?
No.
So, like, but
I want to be like thoughtful and deliberate. You know, one of the exercises I did, and I know she's a friend of both of yours, is Nicole Copping-Pavers. I took a course with her about a year ago. And I don't know why I had never done this, but I was never the one that participated. When I went to conferences, if there was a meditation exercise, I would, I have to go to the bathroom. Gone for, is it done yet? But she had me in one of the courses that she was teaching. She had me create a personal / professional touchstone where I had to identify my mission, my vision, and my values. How am I going to deliver that? And you know what? I have an opportunity on this side of things. One of the opportunities I may have is, I thought I had to do it this way. I want young people to realize, or not even young people new to the profession, or people, right? That you can choose your own path.
And not knowing where it's going to go next. I mean, here it is.
Yeah. I mean,
no one's promising you anything right now.
I've had the benefit of having a number of successful years
to have a foundation.
To have a foundation to be able to do this. But I'd rather have people asking, why does it have to be that way? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're telling me that this is the formula, this is the script.
Right.
Why? You know, we're not used to asking why. We just follow along, and this is why our systems are being called out for being colonialized. Our systems are being called out for being white supremacists, because somebody decided at some point that they knew better, and as time went on, there were less and less challenges to it. So you know what? Let's start pushing back and asking more questions. It doesn't mean that there has to be a revolution or a revolt, but doing that exercise, what are my mission, or what's my mission, what's my vision, what are my values, was so important, because it helped to center me. And so now when I'm talking, because I still do assist individuals, I send them that. Just so you know, this is what you're getting from me. So make the determination now. If I'm not the right person, it's okay.
So go see Nicole.
So yeah. Well, no, there are
one.
Yes, absolutely, Nicole.
Shout out to Nicole.
Yeah, shout out to Nicole, absolutely, because that is, and again, my connection to Nicole was seeing you and Nicole speak last year, and I just knew I needed to reach out to. These are so when I say getting back to finding your tribe where you belong, those are the people that I'm surrounded.
Well, and it's interesting that you brought that up too, because I hadn't thought about this since we spoke at that conference, and I remember talking a lot about therapeutic jurisprudence at the very beginning of that, and just the healing potential of the law and showing up at a very different way, because we can really hurt people if we're not trying to come at things in a very
and we're not doing it intentionally.
We're not but it's that adversarial nature, and it's just so toxic for children, and it's so detrimental. But I could talk for hours on that. I would digress. But but I remember after that talk, I got an email from a judge, and I phoned them after, and they were just speaking and reflecting on my presentation, but one of the things they said to me was I didn't want to identify myself as a judge at a peacekeepers conference for collaborative professionals and mediators, because they felt like they'd be eaten alive almost, for lack of a better word, because you're the litigator. And that's part of the problem too, is that there's this division, litigators, collaborative, mediators, and
silos still.
Yeah, and we're all here to help people. And you see this in other systems too, whether it's education or child welfare, is there's always unintended consequences of our actions. And I always think of my grandfather saying, like, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Right?
Good friend of mine, Bill Lee, said that at an event that he and I were at. Bill was a former pitcher for the Boston Red Sox who got blackballed from baseball, and said that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so is the road to heaven's paved with good intentions.
Yeah, but we have to reflect, though. We have to reflect on that,
but,
right?
I know I've actually said the same thing too, that same line, and then it just occurred, right? What I love about hearing, and this is just as an outsider to the legal industry, what I love about hearing you talk about is a couple of things. Number one, that it's still the same system that can be used if we use it differently. So there are personal choices that people like you are making, David, and they're hard choices. And that's why I'm so happy to have you join us today to talk about this part of the journey, because you've had all the reasons to continue to ignore the voice inside of yourself, the rewards, the wins, all of those things, but you chose, you made a decision, and it wasn't an easy decision for you to make. It was traumatic, actually. That would be the word. You had to take 5-6 months out, take the break. And even when you go into that first 5-6 months, you didn't know it was going to be 5 months, 4 months. You didn't know how long it was going to be. You just took it. And there was no promise being made then that you're going to feel better after it's done. You just did it. And in doing so, you came to this point of realization. And here you are now re-engaging, using all of your knowledge, using all of your experience. And now you're going to do something meaningful within the same system, right? And you're going to, sure, every system can always be adapted, can be evolved, right? It's how it got to this point. But it sounds like it's an exciting time ahead.
I think so.
For what you're going to be doing.
I think so. And maybe what one of the conceptions that I have is expanding outside of this system. Trina, you and I were talking about it before we came on, that, stepping outside, the skills that I've developed are adaptable everywhere, not just within a particular system.
Yeah.
But it's really about, there's that teaching element of me, that mentor element. So there's that part, right? So maybe those within law school, or those going to professional school, or just people in general, again, questioning along the way, staying true to them, identifying along the way. Because that's the one thing that I didn't do. I didn't take the time to identify who I was along the way. It was what I thought I had to be and how I fit within that construct. But pausing, being self-aware, being self-reflective along the way, important. That's not something that they teach us.
No. And
What do you say?
It is.
Away
Here
from
I am
burnout.
at 51 years old, and it's like, holy crap.
I finally learned how to live. Yeah.
So what do you say now, David? I mean, this is just like last thought. If there are, and this is what we're about, right? This is about just breaking, right? You broke it. You broke the cycle for yourself.
But I had to break first to then break the cycle.
That's exactly it. So if there's somebody out there listening who's thinking about, who's like right at the edge there, who's saying, hey, I do feel this way, but I'm not sure I can afford to take those steps. What's the thought to them?
You know what? Again, identify yourself, what you're feeling. Record that. Hold space for yourself. That's not something that we do. I become very adept at holding space for other individuals. Trina, I'm sure doing what you do, you're great at that, but sometimes we don't do it for ourselves. So loving yourself, help trying to figure out who you are. And it's not just a moment in time. Again, that's a process. So start with that. And then develop a plan. It doesn't have to be, I mean, yes.
It could be a pl.
I had the good fortune of, yes, it could be the plug.
Just have the plug going.
And with a vision towards the future, because then you can make that gradual shift. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't recommend that people do what I did and just simply pull the plug.
That, right?
No.
But I
the
think
pioneers did.
I think if you interview me in 10 years, I'm going to say that this was the moment in my life where, you know what? That's where the difference was made.
I'm certain of it.
Mm-hmm. That you know, this was the time where I made a choice, and I didn't have to worry about. It was a dramatic choice, which I'm sure my wife would tell you tends to be consistent with my personality. It was a dramatic choice, but that's what allowed me to recenter myself, reflect on what I've been through in my life and my career. And how do I want to chart the path for myself? That doesn't mean that it's the same for everybody else, but being able to take that, I'm going to consider myself very fortunate having been able to do this.
Do you think it has to be dramatic? Do you think it could be?
No, I think it can be gradual. In fact, if
how
my brain were wired that way,
right?
5-10 years ago, maybe it is more dramatic, because you look at how I've done things. 2016, all of a sudden they said, I'm not taking on any more litigation cases, right? That's my personality, but it doesn't have to be that way if you're planful in how you do it. I mean, it's funny. I was watching over the weekend, I was watching Daisy Jones and the Six, and decided to spend my whole Saturday watching the entire thing, which is 10 episodes of an hour each. And the one moment that it was okay, but the one moment that sticks with me is they are in the lead singer's house, and all the power goes out. So you got a bunch of musicians, a bunch of artists, creative people sitting there, and they start singing. And they sing the song Ooh La La, which is Rod Stewart and the Faces. And it'll be an earworm for those that know the song is, I wish I knew what I know now when I was younger.
Yes.
And it, you can take that in so many different directions. For me, where I took it is, I wish I would have paid more attention along the way.
So just pay attention.
Pay attention, I think, is certainly,
Pay attention to what, though?
Pay attention to yourself.
Yeah.
Pay attention to what goes on internally.
Yeah.
Very rarely, your instincts will very rarely lead you wrong. No. But we suppress them because we think we have to fit within a certain mold. Mm-hmm. And you don't.
It's wisdom.
Yeah. Well,
thanks.
You might be the only one that says that. But no, thank you. Thank you. I hope this can help somebody.
It's whether it helps someone or not, just you're sharing the path that you've taken. Now I can see it, like, we've had so many other conversations, mm-hmm. but hearing you talk about it this way, the detail from your aspirations as, a lawyer to be, to those first moments of, success being paused for you, just really humbling moments along the way, which can really, sometimes, it can be very impactful to a young person at that point in time, right? And then you're like, no, I'm going to go prove something to the world. And you never really bought into that whole culture. You were constantly true to yourself. As much as you feel like you were ignoring what you were thinking, you were actually paying attention to yourself. And then finally you make the decision to really pay attention to yourself. Yeah. And here you are. So I think it's a fantastic journey, and I'm excited to see what's going to happen next.
Oh. Well, something tells me I'll be keeping in touch with both of you. So
Yeah?
you'll see how it develops along the way.
We're going to have an episode about 5 years from now.
Okay.
Talking about
Where are they now?
how's it going? Where are they now? Right?
He's in Panama now.
He's in Panama. And yeah, look at him now. And the smiles are going to be just like the same way they look now. Look, when he said Panama, look at how he lived. Right? So congrats on the discoveries.
Well, you know what? We all have opportunities in life, and that's this is the blank canvas that I'm now staring at. So time to paint the picture. Yeah.
How do you feel about today?
Oh, fantastic. So are we now like leaning out of?
I don't know. We're like.
No, this is
stuff.
You know what? Honestly, it's cathartic in a way. Like this really is the interaction. This is what having watched you guys, this is what I expected, that it was going to be a conversation. And you having gotten to know me, know that I can fit in with that. I like that.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much.